is exciting for solving real world problems. If we're going to get Linux to the masses, I think what we need to do is we need to understand what the masses need. And that's where we're seeing a revolution in desktop Linux, is that traditionally the user interfaces, KDE, GNOME, Enlightenment, pretty much all of them, were designed by software developers who were predicting what users expect from the experience. The difference with GNOME Shell, and I think particularly with Unity, is actually asking users and trying to really see and identify and understand what users want. Charlene from Canonical published a usability study very recently, which compared and contrasted Unity back in Maverick and Unity for Natty, and compared the user experience from the perspective of these new users in terms of emptying the trash, finding files, starting applications. And it's pretty honest. I mean, it certainly highlights the positive elements of Unity, but it also highlights the deficiencies. But this study also talks about how the team was receptive to the feedback from new users. So new users would provide feedback, and then they would tweak the UI to tend to those issues. I mean, I've seen various issues, when watching new users using software. It's fascinating. I'd recommend everybody who's listening to this show does this. Take any OS, whether it's GNOME or Unity or KDE, whatever UI is in the OS. Take any OS and put it in front of somebody who's never used Linux before or rarely uses a computer, and you'll be amazed at how incredibly complicated some things that are intuitive to us appear to other people. And that's just because that's the case with lots of software. And I think but what we're doing is we're edging towards a world now where we really listen to users and what they need. And we have to do that if we're going to get that out there. If we're going to get out there.
And begs for a question. Why not work upstream with GNOME 3 and trying to persuade other people who are involved in it? I think Fedora is directly involved in the development of GNOME Shell. Why not try to persuade them, in fact, to put those changes because this is, I think, a questions you, or a direction you are trying to kind of put aside now.
Well, I think that there's a few reasons. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about 3 weeks ago about this, and I'm sure you guys saw it. Some bickering between some members of Canonical and GNOME about what happened and what didn't happen. Canonical participated in some various sprints with GNOME, and there were some agreements made, and different people have got different perspectives on what was agreed to. And I think what basically happened was the Canonical design team sought to participate in GNOME Shell development, and for whatever reason, it didn't really work out. And I think part of the reason was logistical, and part of the reason is just different perspectives on how the design should work. I mean, there's no single humanitarian great design. This is what I find interesting watching a lot of the responses to GNOME Shell and Unity's. You get some people who say Unity's awesome, GNOME Shell's terrible, or Unity's terrible, or GNOME Shell's fantastic, or both of them suck. It's very personal. Design's very personal in terms of how we work. I mean, what I think is great design doesn't necessarily mean that you guys think is great design, and I shouldn't ever try and ram my design down your throat. And I think, the Ayatana project and the GNOME Shell project just see the solution to these user interface challenges in slightly different ways. And there's nothing wrong with that. Fedora definitely coordinating a lot with GNOME Shell, but that's not terribly surprising given the fact that Fedora is a Red Hat community distribution. And also Fedora their policy has always been, to just basically ship a pretty vanilla upstream with some tweaks to the theme and the wallpaper. So Fedora basically ship whatever GNOME make, and that's completely fine. So it's not surprising.
That's a funny way. I should just correct you. The people who develop GNOME Shell are, I don't want to quote numbers because they may have changed, but it's like 80% people are associated with Red Hat.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah, so it's probably true. And so to say something like Fedora just ships whatever, no, GNOME people are doing. It's quite a unfair way of saying that. They actually build the GNOME desktop for quite a lot of people. At least the shell part of things.
Well, bear in mind that Red Hat is not just a single entity. I mean, different pieces of Red Hat work on different things. I mean, you know, I think it's probably safe to say, I don't have any specific figures, but like you say, that it's mainly Red Hat people who are working on GNOME Shell. And I think it's completely reasonable for Red Hat folks to drive the direction of that. I mean, Red Hat as a company is investing significantly in GNOME Shell. And, when you put your staff behind that, and I think they've worked tremendously in a collaborative public way, but it doesn't surprise me that the first distro that's going to really be optimized for Shell is going to be a Red Hat distribution. That's
I think I hopefully you won't be bothered by me bringing up the issue of Mono. Because one of the things about Fedora, Fedora does not agree to using Mono quite much. Red Hat has got a very strong policy, had it for quite a few years. Even before the FSF ruled out, we basically said, well, we don't think it's safe to use Mono. We don't think it's safe to use C#. They basically have a policy where they try to keep things separate. Keep the Mono. They're fine with you installing Mono, but they don't really want to ship it to you or to encourage you to use it. And one of the issues I've had with Ubuntu for quite a few years, and in fact, this is why some people wrongly think that I have something against Ubuntu, which I don't. Basically, it's usually the KDE side of things, but this is something I've been doing for ages now, since like year 2000. But when it comes to Mono, I write a lot about patents, and I know the situation with Mono very, very well. I wrote hundreds upon hundreds of posts about it. One of the things that I saw happening was Ubuntu, or I suppose I should say Ubuntu, is suppressing discussion about the issue sometimes. You probably think that's not true, but I'll tell you that in the forums, if people bring up the subject of Mono, they do a kind of a free speech zone where they kind of remove the post and try to isolate them and put them aside, instead of talking about the issues.
Well, I think it's important that we, so a few things on that. One is that, suppression is a strong word, and, there is nothing, in terms of the policy and the operation of the Ubuntu community and the Ubuntu project, in terms of the values that we instill in the project, there is nothing saying that discussion about Mono, whether it's critique or whether it's support, should be suppressed, or whether it should be censored or anything like that. So there is nothing. The Ubuntu project, in terms of how we culturally operate, has never and will never suppress discussion about Mono. If you've seen that, then you've seen.
Yeah, this is why I said Ubuntu. That's mostly Ubuntu forums in this case.
Right, and but what I'm saying is that, you know, in terms of how we govern the project, in terms of the technical board and the Ubuntu Community Council and our various governance and the leaders of the project, you will never ever see a situation where a leader or a member of a governance board is suppressing somebody's desire to talk about Mono in whatever form. Now, the Ubuntu forums is, bear in mind that there's over 1 million people on the Ubuntu forums. And, even though we may not, in terms of how we officially operate the project, even though we may not suppress that, you will find some people if you take any 1 million people, there'll be some people who will facepalm when you talk about anything. Cause it's people, it's human nature. So there will be some situations where some people will kind of go into the forums, and talk about Mono, and some people will say, oh, come on, whatever. And I think that's just, I think part of that is because, the fear about Mono, I hate to say this, has kind of become a caricature of itself. I've noticed this.
That's a bit of a, I mean, this is the type of attitude, I'll tell you on a personal note, I suppose. Okay, so we had this discussion before when both of us were in Pulse Weekly. I have a personal issue with Mono, not because it's from Novell. I get a lot of flack, personal smears and lies about me. Even yesterday I saw a person lying about me, and I see it all every day. Usually don't say anything about it. And this is coming from people who are adamant on bringing C# to Linux. Maybe they developed it for, maybe they were developing for Visual Basic before and using these, maybe they use it, I don't know, maybe they actually have to use it for it, and maybe do want to use Linux and they try to help Linux by bringing what they use to Linux, I think there is an issue, and I have on my side quite a few big names who also were on the record going and saying, well, we do think from a legal point of view